with a bow tie in Chattanooga, Tennessee, David Tulis.
It's interesting how stories flow together, ones that seem to have no real connection, but they all seem to have, as I would like to suggest in just a minute here, how they have a single source, a single fountain, a root that they share. And that root, I think, is fear. And the fruit of that root of fear can be seen in Commissioner Greg Beck's proposal to remove the statue of A.P. Stewart in front of the county courthouse. There's fear there. And there's fear also in the way the members of the public are treated by police during protests around the country, and how there's fear also in the use of abusive judicial process by courts, by mayors, by county governments, by sheriffs, abusive process because we can't have people dissenting from the way we do things here. And that is the story this morning about Carol Gaddy, who's another day in jail as a political prisoner in Sequatchie County, right near Chattanooga. Okay, here in Chattanooga, we seem insulated. We have good government, and we don't really know anything about the abuses in places such as Charlottesville and other places where you have violent protest. We after all had Thursday, a week ago or 8 days ago, a rally downtown full of virulent rhetoric, and yet not a single arrest, not any confrontation at all, as we see how God grants this city and the people in it, of all opinions, of all religions even, a kind of amity that we don't find elsewhere in the United States. But there is a storyline that rises from fear, and in Sequatchie County, that fear is against a woman by, we could say, the male establishment, but I'm not going to really persist in describing the conflict there in terms of sexism or feminism or patriarchalism, that kind of thing. It's perhaps more cronyism and a loose way with the law. That is what we find all around the country. Even here in Tennessee, there is tremendous looseness with the law. Think for a second about the matter of the blue lights going off behind travelers and operators of motor vehicles. Those are two distinct legal categories, by the way, on the highways and byways and roads of Chattanooga. The requirement to read Miranda rights is completely ignored. It is routinely ignored. The most recent public example of an arrest was that of a young man who was behind the wheel, and in his car was City Council member Demetrius Coonrod. This was in mid-June, well, maybe mid-June. And the officer, Tiffany Lenz, did not read his rights. And she has to, because according to State versus Garcia and one other case that I mentioned a few days ago, I think it's the Applebound case or Appleby case, something like that. The flashing of the blue lights is an arrest. Okay, if you're stopped on the highway in traffic or in a transportation stop, you are under arrest. And yet routinely, officers in Chattanooga do not read your Miranda rights. And they're doing that to fool you. They're doing that effectively lying to you so that you will chatter away, hoping that you can escape being arrested or escape trouble, and thereby giving probable cause or reasonable suspicion to charge you with something more than what was initially in view in the pretext of that stop. We have a loose regard of the rules, and it is fear, perhaps, on the part of the state and the state actors that lets these rules be bent. We're afraid of having to follow the law, because that will increase our workload and that will slow down our operation. And I'm suggesting that we here in Chattanooga, you and I, that's two of us, you and I should call for full arrest for when there's an arrest, there should be an arrest, and that the rights be read, and that everybody who stopped in a transportation stop or traffic stop in the area of commerce by commercial government, that is to say the police department, commercial government must read the Miranda rights of the arrestee, because you are under arrest. Okay, it is a detention at law, and you are, the moment the light goes off, you are under arrest. Okay, just understand that is State versus Garcia. Read, and I get this on page 1 of the rather lengthy article in Tennessee Jurisprudence, the legal encyclopedia that every man should have a copy of. I don't have a copy of that set, and I'd really like to get one. So if you know an attorney who's clearing out his library, going digital with Westlaw, and wants to get rid of Tinger, make sure he knows of my interest in getting that set. But there on that first page, you are apprised by court rulings of that fact. You're under arrest when the lights go off. So there is in the operation of the state a fear against the people. We see it in the militarization, the maltreatment of people in protest, and that is something that I want you to be aware of. And if you want a free protest guide, if you are my listener, you're interested in protest and asserting your rights, just email me through Nooganomics.com, and I will send you a free protest guide written by the Rutherford Institute and made available at no charge. It's an attachment. You can get it online, of course, but I'll love to hear from you. Make some comment to me about my show if you don't mind, and I will send that to you. It is the constitutional Q&A, the right to protest. Just send me an email through Nooganomics.com, and I'll send you back the attachment. It's a booklet that explains what your rights are on the point of protest, and the abuse of protesters around the country shows that they're afraid. It shows how brittle the system is becoming, and that I would take that as investment advice. By the way, if you are an investor, realize the system is not going to function. There's no suppleness in it. And in the financial sector, the brittleness comes about by incredibly cheap credit that now is not doing its job anymore. We don't have QEs anymore. And we had prior to the meltdown, we had gigantic ballooning of the credit world, artificial money, with no QE. Now we have QE and QE after QE, quantitative easing by central banks around the world, and the effect of each new dollar is less and less and less than it was, much less than it was previously, without the great effort, the Herculean effort to keep the debt economies of the world rising, as I say, with growth. The system is brittle and it's not working in many areas. And here in the area of the relation directly of the people and the state, that takes place in traffic encounters, that takes place in courts. We see, I think, fear behind the officials, fear among officers, fear among judges, and on the other hand, you can also say that Judge Thomas Graham in Sequatchie County Chancery Court is fearless. You could look at it another way as well. He is not just fearful, but he is fearless. He's fearless because he is violating his oath of office. And this is David Tulis. Call, you're live on the air. What's on your mind?
Great subject, David. Keeping up the fight for Carol Gaddy, who's political prisoner there in Sequatchie County. I have a suggestion to thwart these scummy, unborn baby-killing Democrats and liberals that are now digging up the graves of Confederate soldiers all over the country. By the way, Kasich signed an order in Ohio, that scummy Republican, to allow this. We need to call out the militia and the sheriff's department to protect these graves. And I would say shoot on sight anyone that intends to desecrate a Confederate grave for protecting the interests of their state, which the states legally have the right to secede, and they still have the right to secede today. There's nothing prevented it under Article 1, Section 10. So I would say, there needs to be a call to action to the militia and the sheriff's department to protect these graves from desecration. I'd like to hear your position on the air. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Desecration of graves, clearly that's what's happening. And Greg Beck, who is proposing to unseat the statue of General Stewart in front of the county courthouse, is driven by fear. It's a kind of opportunism as well, but I think perhaps it's also fear. We're fearing to be offended further. We're fearing we can't recall the past. We want to make things right among our people. We want to show you that we're not having it anymore. There's a kind of, you might say, courage as well in Greg Beck's proposal. But behind that, I would say there's a kind of fear. There's a fear of dealing with the truth. There's a fear of dealing with the past. And as Dave Crockett tells me, history is additive. It keeps adding to itself. And caller, you're live on the air. David Tulis, and the number, by the way, for the other listener out there is 800-8949, 800-8949. And caller, what's on your mind, please?
I think Greg Beck wants a statue removed so that it can be replaced with a statue of him for being the brave man to remove an offensive inanimate object. Thanks.
Well, I'm not going to try to psychoanalyze Greg Beck. I'll leave that to you, caller. Thank you very much. But the idea of fear is of course that we can't be offended, and I think in the prickly attitude of many people who are starting to take offense now and looking for new areas in which to take offense, there's not peace, there's not amity in view, there's really not reconciliation, there's really not reconstruction. If you right, reconstruction in the after 1867, I think it was, pretended to be something about rebuilding the South, but it was really a despoilation of the South. And it made white people very, very angry against black people. There was amity between the races in the South prior to the war, and even during the war, there were no slave revolts in the southern areas where the men had gone off to fight the war. The women folk were perfectly protected by the black men there. They had nothing to fear. A lot of amity, but Reconstruction made things much worse. And I think what we really want to have is a real Reconstruction. Not the pseudo Reconstruction of the Yankee federal government with its carpetbaggers and its violent, hateful league operators in the South. What we really want to have is Reconstruction and rebuilding. History is additive, as Dave Crockett says. Now, to get to Mike's question about Beck and tearing up graveyards where bones are gathered in their collapsed coffins underground. Clearly, that is a wicked thing, and that's done in hate. That's done when you have a religious persecution. For example, when Mary obtained the throne in England, she dug up the reformers and their bones. She dug up, going way back 200 or 300 years, she dug up some of the first reformers out of religious spite and hatred, and desecrated their bones and their graves to make a point that we Roman Catholics, we are in charge. And we're not going to have any of these heretics who talk about God's grace and God's sovereign goodness and salvation by God's grace alone and not through works through the church. And there is bitterness and anger and hatred in anybody who digs up a grave. It is a hugely humiliating thing to do. And Governor Kasich, Mike, as you're pointing out, passing that rule, allowing that to be done, is simply exacerbating the problem. And these are opportunists. They're very bold and courageous, as Judge Graham is in Sequatchie County. But there is behind it a kind of fear, and the kind of fear I think that is provoked by people such as Carol Gaddy. Carol Gaddy is a political prisoner here in the Chattanooga area. Okay, there are political prisoners here. We don't have to worry about them in the former Soviet Union or in China or in North Korea. There are many there as well. We don't have to go far across the way to Saudi Arabia, where the imams and their Islamic, their Mohammedan creeds have imprisoned many Christians, often with great violence to their persons and their property and their effects. Here in Chattanooga area, we have Carol Gaddy, and there's a sentence at the very end of an order. I just wanted you to hear a quote from Judge Thomas Graham, who's elected. Right, this man is elected. And yet once in office, he is bound to obey the law, and he is bound to respect the constitutional limits upon the state's agents, and the state's civil agents, of which cities such as Dunlap, of course, are one. Dunlap city government is a civil authority. It does not have criminal statutory authority, according to my reading of two major cases that suggest grave limits upon municipal corporate power, which needs to be enforced. And just by the way, that's what Basil Marceau says. Basil Marceau says that Chattanooga versus Davis, Chattanooga versus Myers need to be enforced, and they need to be enforced by legal action. Someone needs to take legal action to make these corporations stop. Now, in Dunlap, if these two cases matter, if these two cases are in fact saying what I think they're saying, we need to see a pulling back into their proper sphere, judicial and administrative city corporate action. Here in Chattanooga, that's going to be, we haven't heard reports yet about it, but the war against Airbnb, the war against the gig city by Mayor Andy Burke, that we have to see results of that by the office of Donna Williams, who is the economic development minister, you might say, for Mayor Burke. And she is on the warpath against people who are in the free market using Airbnb and like platforms to rent their privately owned houses out to visitors of Chattanooga. That authority is purported only, okay? It's not a real authority. It is a sham authority that the city council pretended to have in a vote, with only Demetrius Coonrod voting no, by the way. Only Demetrius Coonrod here in Chattanooga voted no on that. And even the conservatives, Darren Ledford, the others, the sponsor of the Airbnb map, all of them are simply wrong. They're simply legally ignorant. They're legally ignorant, okay? And Demetrius Coonrod is the only one who was right on that vote. The only one, Demetrius Coonrod, the only smart city council person who understood, I think at least in part, she understood the limits on city power and voted no on that Airbnb map that arbitrarily and capriciously divides the city, banning some from the free private use of their homes through Airbnb and like networks, and then granting others permission to enter into that stream of commerce, if you will, by permission. That map is simply illegal. And Darren Ledford and the others who voted for it are simply ignorant. And I'd say they're acting in bad faith, because I told them that was wrong. I told them you can't do that. That vote is illegal. That map is illegal. Forget it. There's no way to regulate the internet. You can't raise a wall of Beijing around Chattanooga, Mayor Burke, and City Council. You can't do it. The mayor of Dunlap is somewhat like the mayor of Chattanooga, a bold man. But is it bold or is it fear? I'd say, again, I'm not proving my point. I'm afraid I'm just suggesting it. I'm just alleging this. But there's fear of the people behind the bold, saucy defiance of constitutional rights. Carol Gaddy's in view here as we are on the David Tulis program. Now, just to mention this quote here, it says, it is therefore further ordered as follows. Okay. And point 2 says, Thomas Graham here, Chancellor of the estimable Chancery Court in Sequatchie County. If the defendants refuse to allow the city and its representatives to inspect the defendant's residential premises as directed, defendants will be in contempt of court, and the court will order the defendants incarcerated for contempt of court and remain incarcerated until such time as defendants allow the inspection by the city and its representatives. That is simply an error, and it's an error in bad faith. And the funny thing is that Mrs. Gaddy, she's just a woman, okay? She's just a woman, but she has got spunk, and she knows more than some of these lawyers do, though she does not have a lawyer, though I think she really does need legal assistance and legal counsel in her fight, and she's going to go on the offensive at some point. And I hope that Judge Graham's favorite favorite seat in his living room, the love seat that he got from his great-great-grandmother, that he'll enjoy looking at that, because Mrs. Gaddy will have a right to it when she sues him under Title 42 and dispossesses him of it. How can he hold her in contempt of court and punish her when the ordinance itself does not have a penalty provision? In other words, how can the court take umbrage and take offense at her saying no when the ordinance itself has no mechanism to enforce itself, right? This is a civil ordinance in a town under private law from the Tennessee legislature. It does not have any authority to penalize anybody criminally, and yet Judge Thomas Graham is criminally accusing and holding and confining in his jail a woman who's standing on her rights. Look, you cannot convert a constitutional right into a crime. You cannot convert the assertion of a right into a crime. You just can't do it. It's simply not possible. And whenever it happens, it is violative. It violates the Tennessee oppression statute. And that is what is being claimed in a filing with the court yesterday by Thomas Gaddy, the son, under some important rulings from the high court in Washington, such as Camara versus Municipal Court of the City and County of San Francisco. That was a case from 1967 that makes it very clear that even if there is a criminal provision attached to an inspection regime, right, an administrative inspection regime by a city of rented government properties or government subsidized properties, even if there's a renter involved here, not an owner, that renter cannot be criminally charged, criminally penalized for saying no and saying you have to have a warrant to search my property. And that's what was ruled in that case. I don't think that's been overturned, though there may be some other rulings later in the past 50 years that have nibbled away at that, as the high court has been doing against the Fourth Amendment that belongs to you, my listener, belongs to you. And the high court is nibbling away against it. This is David Tulis. We are brought to you by many fine people, including Clay Whitaker at the McCune Law Firm. Call Clay or Jim McCune or Trevor Atkins if you need any kind of legal advice or services. And also want you to know that Eric Pelton is available to help you with your small business cash flow problems, do your accounting business as well. Eric Pelton. This is David Tulis, and there's some things to hear in just a minute about this petition for writ of habeas corpus. I asked my son the other day, do you know what you would say in a petition for writ of habeas corpus? Do you know what with the main? Could you do it in one sentence? There's one sentence that will get you out if you're illegally held in a jail cell.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader.